This is Box Brown for Minoday. So, I'm here going to answer these questions. Growing up, my favorite comics were Garfield, Calvin and Hobbes, and The Far Side were what I read as like a child. And it's hard to say if any of those are influential. I don't think like Garfield is. But Far Side, maybe. Calvin and Hobbes, probably. Biggest influence from like my childhood, age like 15, 16, 17, was Matt Groening, Life in Hell, the guy who created The Simpsons. His book Life in Hell and the collected Life in Hell books were some of my favorite when I was a teenager. So I think some of those jokes, some of that influence still resides inside of me. Thank you. I drew comics and did drawings all my whole childhood, and I stopped when I hit puberty around 13 because I didn't think I was good enough to continue it. I thought of it as like something kids did. I don't know, I like lost all my confidence and I stopped taking art. I like refused to take an art class, even like as an elective in school, for some reason. And I just like quit and didn't come back to drawing again until I was 25. And I had to teach myself everything from scratch. And it was because I had started reading comics again, and I had found some comics that I had been looking for comics for adults because I was 25 and like I tried to read superhero comics and I was like, I just didn't care at all. And I was like, there's got to be comics for adults. So I was searching out and I ended up finding James Kachalka, American Elf. And that was the first comic I read where I found out you could make a comic that wasn't a superhero comic or a newspaper strip. It was like just about your regular life. American Elf was just a diary strip about James's regular life. And so I just kind of copied him, and that's how it started. And so I haven't missed a day of drawing comics since then. Maybe a few days, but for a long time I would draw at least one comic page every day, and I don't feel right unless I draw at least a comic per day. And it was just that. So I started basically when I was 25 teaching myself how to draw, and my first book, Andre the Giant, came out when I was 34, 35, 10 years later. So I started Retrofit Comics, a publishing company, in 2011 because at that time there was a big problem with comics distribution where all the indie publishers and art comics publishers stopped publishing short comics and moved only into graphic novels. And so there was no space for those type of comics anymore. And so I created Retrofit to reclaim that space and to make short comics for all those people who had been working on that, and then publishers just stopped making them. So I tried to bring it back and did it for a few years. It was a really hard job, and especially to do that while trying to work really hard on my own comics was very taxing, but I really enjoyed it too because I was able to work with so many different artists and collaborate and and see how different people worked, and also it gave me a lot of skills in like the promotional area of like promoting comics and things like that, and like how the business worked in general. It also allowed me to meet a lot of people in the industry. um, it was a great experience. I only stopped doing it after my son was born, and it became something had to go, and unfortunately it was retrofit. Also because I never made any money on it, it was, and my comics made some money, so it was easy, kind of an easy choice in that way, but I do miss it sometimes. We began working together because I was like a huge fan of James Kachalka, and I was like on his message board all the time, and we became friendly, and eventually we became pretty close friends, and now we text every day. And I don't know, yeah, he's a cool guy, and he was like my hero. Not anymore though. Now he's just a friend. um, he kind of like taught me that like it doesn't, nothing matters. There's no rules. There's no, you could do whatever you want, and the only thing stopping you is you holding yourself back. And once you remove those limiters on yourself, you can like do things that you never thought you could do. I learned that from James Kachalka. So he's been a big influence on me. Like his work has been a big influence on me, but also I go to him for advice and stuff about comics because he's had such a longer career than me, and he's been doing it so much longer. And he works harder than me and makes more work than I could ever do. He's like the Terminator. I started doing nonfiction comics. It kind of like spun out of the doing autobiographical comics, which are nonfiction, um, and doing those for a long time, and then realizing that my life is actually not that interesting and not interesting enough to make into a comic. So I think it was then that I started to explore making comics out of other people's lives. I did like 500 pages of comics about religion called Everything Dies that were only published as on the web and as mini comics, never published in a book. But they are available if anybody would want to read them. I don't know. But that's how it started, was this exploration of different religions and like belief systems, and about like the creation of the universe. And so I did a lot of those. I did like 500 pages. And when I finished them, I just was like ready to do something else, and then I did this Andre the Giant comic, and then that was that. But I am heavily influenced by documentary film, and kind of think of my comics as documentary films in a way, even though they're comics. So so that kind of like is very influential on me, because I watch a lot of documentaries while I'm making comics, and it just kind of like seeped in, and I ended up making these documentary style comics. So I kind of usually try to follow chronology, so it's just like you can follow the dates, but sometimes there's flashbacks, you're moving all around time, you know um I kind of just feel my way through it, but I mostly try to follow chronology. I mostly think that if you're telling a story, you're going, this happened, then this happened, then this happened. And I know there's people that like do things other ways. Like there's a documentary on HBO right now called The Vow, and they are jumped right into the story and then kind of flash back to stuff, and where there's like these reveals later on. I don't like usually do it that way. um, I don't know. I don't know why. I mean, it's gimmicky a little, and Quentin Tarantino-esque or something. But I try to follow the order in which events happened and allow myself to have asides to explain things that are tangential to the story, and the freedom to do that, because sometimes there's an aside that is really interesting and people in the past have completely brushed it off as an aside, but if you look at it closely, it actually is very influential to the overall story. For instance, in the Tetris book, without giving too much away, one of the collaborators on Tetris killed himself and his whole family, and it often gets pushed aside as not really part of the story. But not only is it a crazy story, but also there's no way you can say that Tetris didn't influence this guy's actions, because he worked with Tetris so long and moved to America because of Tetris, and it seems that his actions were based on monetary failings, although it's hard to say because it is a family annihilator situation. But anyway, I just feel like I have to allow myself the freedom to touch on those things and to not be afraid to explore issues that might be difficult. Okay, so what are my working materials? I'll show you. I have them right here. This is the main thing that I ink with. Micron 08. It's just like a little pen. I pencil with this really old pencil that has a really rounded tip. I make a lot of straight lines using this really broken plastic T-square, and I make a lot of circles and straight lines using stuff like this. And then I scan it and I Photoshop it, and I have a little tablet that I work on. It's kind of like a Frankenstein style, and it's like not really up to date because whatever. But I like having original art, and I do sell it. So it's like, if I worked all digital, I wouldn't have that. So I'm happy to stay doing this hybrid style. Oh yeah, I mean, listen, is there truth? Yes. Can we observe the truth? Yes. Can we really describe the truth? Not as well as we think we can. So all truth, all statements are a point of view, and they're all a person's perspective. So I try very hard to stick to the facts and the truth as much as I can. I try not to exaggerate. I try to keep it tight to the facts. But I know that it's just my version of events. It's the Box Brown version of the story. It's not the truth. It's not the be-all, end-all of anything. There's a great documentary filmmaker, Errol Morris. Some of the best documentary films that there are. But some of the things that he does is when he is making a documentary and interviewing people, like I'm being interviewed right now, what he would have done is dressed the set behind me with all, maybe like an award or like my stuff, all this stuff to say something about the character. Now that's directly changing the facts and depicting someone in a specific way. So that's how I feel about documentary. You got to just know that it's not exactly the truth, but some are more even-handed than others, and you can use your own critical thinking skills to take an understanding to what you're seeing. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't have those critical thinking skills or don't use them, and think that anything they're seeing that's well produced is the truth, or is not well produced, or is just saying what they think it's the truth. I don't know. The truth seems very fluid right now. Anyway. Keith Haring is has been a huge influence on my work, mostly because my mom is a huge fan of his and a collector of his, and he was like one of the first artists I knew about as like a child. He was extremely popular too, and his work was everywhere. But I would say that the way his work has had a big influence on me, but not directly. I didn't copy his work or sit down and examine all of it, but it was all around me all the time. And so I see it that way. Other art that was in my house growing up, Patrick Nagel, tons of it. Very 80s, like simply irresistible thing. But also like musicians, music. For a long time, the Flaming Lips were a big influence on me. It's hard to say what's going on right now at the moment. Maybe YouTube is a huge influence on me. Working on a book about Vladimir Putin, but I'm just the artist on it, and it's I'm working with a writer who's a Russia expert, and it's really interesting. And here's like a page I drew yesterday. This is like an oil refinery in Russia. It's super interesting to me because I didn't know a lot of this stuff, and the guy is like the writer is a complete expert in the field, so I'm able to like learn from like at a very high level while I'm making this, because I'm finding like you have to kind of teach it to yourself first before you can make it into a comic. Also, I have a book about He-Man coming out soon that will come out after that, and G.I. Joe and Transformers, so there's that too. Those are all the questions. Thank you, Mino. And I wish I could have been there for Minoday. Have a great day, everyone.